with a few thoughts on broader trends right now that we're also tracking. One, of course, is AI, and what is that going to mean for all of the different potential? I think generally speaking, AI is going to be very positive for this topic. Um, the other are GLP-1 drugs. And so those are the Ozempics that we're seeing, and we're seeing a lot of change in the food industry um, because there's this new demand for smaller portions, for fresher foods. Over 8 million Americans are taking those drugs right now, and it's like quite a tidal wave of disruption for the food industry that we think could have kind of positive and negative impacts on the waste topic. With that, I will pass it on to Jackie to talk a little bit more about the business environment and what we're seeing there.
Thanks, Dana, and thanks for the invite to be here. I'm really happy to join you all. By way of very quick introduction, my name is Jackie Suggitt. I'm the Vice President of Business Initiatives and Community Engagement at ReFed. So a lot of the work Dana talked about in her intro, both one-on-one engagements with food businesses, as well as a lot of the collaborative partnerships that we help facilitate here in the US. And before I even dive into some of the content, I think at the highest level, I want to kick off this section acknowledging that by their very nature, food businesses are motivated to address waste. Waste is by definition an inefficiency. Inefficiencies are a cost, and so there is inherent motivation to do something about it. That being said, the business environment, as we'll talk through, is very complex. So there are competing priorities. There are heavily siloed supply chains and nodes within the supply chain. There are regulatory barriers, and honestly, a lot of just not knowing what to do, right? What's the next step after we've done perhaps the low-hanging fruit? So we'll talk through a little bit of that today, but at the highest level, I'd say that's part of the key message going into this. But let's start with that systemic problem. I talk about food waste being systemic in nature. That's a simple phrase. I actually mean several different things when I say that. The first is that it does in fact happen throughout the entire food system from farm to fork. The second Dana already referenced, which is that a head of broccoli that I throw away because I forgot about it in my fridge is very different than a head of broccoli that goes to waste on farm in terms of cost, cause, and solution. The third, though, is that it is not as simple as identifying where within the system food waste happens. So there's a very neat number here attached to farm, 17.5 million tons. However, food waste that happens on farm is not necessarily because of policies, decisions, and behaviors that happen on farm. It's often because of influences throughout the supply chain. So going back to our broccoli, it may be left in the field, never harvested because of specifications that are set at the retail level. And retailers, at least in part, set specifications based on how you and I spend our dollars within their stores. So that relationship happens in both directions, where policies, decisions, and behaviors at one node heavily influence waste within the other nodes, which is really part of the justification for collaborative solutions across the supply chain on food waste. We can go to the next slide. Momentum is happening there, both within the individual walls of food businesses as well as collaboratively. Businesses within the US and around the world are all making progress voluntarily and collaboratively on this issue. This is one example of that. This represents businesses that are part of either the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment and or the US Food Waste Pact, which are two collaborative efforts within the US focused exclusively on food waste reduction. They mirror the Target Measure Act framework that's used globally. So they have all set some level of commitment on reducing food waste. They are all measuring and reporting on food waste reduction. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but to me, public reporting is really kind of the base level of what we should be doing with data. There's so much more we can do. We call it decision-ready data to influence what actions these businesses actually take to reduce waste. Public reporting does not inherently reduce waste. It's good for accountability, but it's not actually a solution itself. And then they're going further and they're taking action. So as I said, they are driving solutions within their own four walls, but one of the core powers of the collaborative effort is connecting and unsiloing the different nodes in the supply chain and getting them to work together. And I'll share a few more examples on that as we go through. I'll also say this model is echoed globally. I actually just got back from a week in Mexico City where we met with our peers in 10 different countries who are running similar pre-competitive partnerships focused on food waste in the private sector. So this model really is happening around the world. And progress is happening. So this is a couple examples of where we're seeing progress. The chart on the left comes from an annual report from the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment in the US. And it shows that over this 4-year period, we are seeing a 28% reduction in unsold food. We're also at the same time seeing over 20% increases in composting rates and donation rates. So even though there's less food to get rid of, they're still getting rid of it in the right places more often. A lot of that we have to attribute to not necessarily explicit business behaviors, but just the environment at large. These were COVID years. These were years of heavy inflation on food prices, both of which, and this is retail data, I should clarify. So both of those in a retail setting definitely supported the reduction in unsold food. But there's also progress happening because of very specific behaviors. And we know that because of the right half of this slide, which are specific examples where we're seeing solutions being implemented and scaled throughout the private sector. Again, these come from that list of companies you saw on the previous slide, either in the West Coast or nationally in the US, who have run almost 20 different pilot projects or scaled pilot projects over the last couple of years. So a few that I'll speak to here that are listed, we are seeing AI ordering software being implemented and having notable reductions per store. In addition to the food waste reductions, we're seeing that software pay for itself with other efficiencies within that store environment. Dana already mentioned upcycling. That's we also talk about as in-store repurposing. I think what's most interesting here is we're seeing net new sales, so new products that are driving revenue for the stores without cannibalizing the products that they're coming from. So for example, a rotisserie chicken turned into a chicken salad, they're actually still selling at least as many rotisserie chickens within their stores, likely because of perceived freshness of that product. Employee engagement is a huge trend right now. This is personally one of my favorites. It falls in the less sexy category that we've been talking about, but these are low tech, low cost solutions that are coming from frontline employees in their sphere of influence. And within that sphere of influence, we're seeing really significant reductions in waste, and that the 53 to 74% range. So this is a really exciting area for me. And then finally, we're diving deep into commodities. So we're saying, okay, let's tackle strawberries. Let's look at that entire supply chain and try and figure out what is actually happening within that supply chain that we might be missing when we look within an individual sector. So as one highlight from a recent study, we found that 25% of the strawberries that do go to waste on farm are in fact edible. They're just not marketable. So going beyond those specific examples, trying to summarize, maybe level up what some of those key strategies are leading to waste reduction, I'll pull out 4. I think we could name several more. The first is engaging the supply chain. So actually starting where I left off on the last slide, we're seeing a lot of businesses who are done with the low-hanging fruit or the stuff they can immediately control within their own environments, looking to have more complex relationships throughout the supply chain and to partner with their suppliers to understand, again, where that waste is happening and how they can work together on solutions. So going back to my strawberry example, where 25% of what's left behind is edible, that's not a farmer's problem to solve on their own because they don't have a market for it. So we're actually seeing specific examples of upstream and downstream players coming together and finding new market channels for those strawberries. Frontline workers, I want to call out the word empowering here, not educating. I think educating is part of empowering, but we have to go beyond that and actually incorporate them into identification of the solutions. As I mentioned, these are often low-cost, low-tech solutions, but they're also solutions that would never come up in a CEO roundtable. These are things very specific within those manufacturing lines or other areas where frontline workers are engaging, but seeing really heavy impacts. The third is data. Measurement and analytical tools, including our own, are becoming a lot more sophisticated. So we're actually able to go beyond public reporting, as I mentioned, and get into decision-ready data. And what I mean by that is we can look at specific data within a business and say, okay, based on what we know about what's happening within your business, we can actually reprioritize the 42 solutions that Dana referenced based on what's going to have the highest ROI for your business. So really what's informing strategy and accelerating the adoption of solutions. And then finally, leaning in on technology. Dana gave a few really great examples of this, and so I'll leave it there for now and kind of throw your mind back to some of the examples that she gave in her presentation. There are obviously still challenges. I don't like ending on challenges, but I do want to walk through just kind of some of the realistic issues that are still making it hard to make progress on food waste. And then we can certainly come back and talk about solutions to these in the Q&A or other trends that we're seeing. But if you all highlight one, competing priorities, behaviors and policies that reduce food waste can conflict with business, like standard business practices or other sustainability initiatives. What I mean by that, just as an example, plastic packaging often comes up in conversations on food waste because packaging extends shelf life. So what is the trade-off there? Or another thing we're seeing right now is businesses that are bringing in like cut fruit programs in-house because it's fresher, it gives them a longer shelf life within the store, and it increases customer satisfaction. It actually drives more waste because it's not done centralized. Another related thing here I'll say is sustainability issues often lack central owners who are also operational and financial decision makers within a business. So that there's some disconnect between decision making and implementation. The business case sustainability budgets are often very small, so sustainability teams are often having to sell it internally for their own dollars in order to invest in labor or solutions or changes to business practices. Misaligned incentives, the cost and benefit are not often or not always incurred at the same point within the supply chain. So again, talking about packaging or standardized date labeling, the cost is incurred by one business and the benefit is often real or perceived happening later in the supply chain. Delivering customer expectations, we are all customers. Even when we are educated customers, we still like to walk into a store and see a beautiful pyramid of apples or a full buffet. That's a little bit kind of woven into our expectations. So we are driving some of those business practices that are in fact wasteful. There are several solutions out there that can impact these, but legacy practices are really hard to shift within a business environment. And then finally, fresh is messy. Basically, the supply chains for fresh product, meat and produce are highly vulnerable. We have cold chains that can be unpredictable and challenging to manage, but these categories are often have the highest demand for freshness and perceived freshness. So it's a sticky problem and will continue to be. So I'm going to stop there. Certainly a lot more to talk about, but I think, again, core message, businesses want to reduce waste. It is in their best interest to do so because of these challenges and a lot of the other things I've talked about the last few minutes. It is also hard. And so there's prioritization and decision-making and collaboration that needs to happen in order for that change to happen.